Hey guys, John here. Today we're in the Repro 1 from Yuhi, and today's patch is going to be a really cool one. It's called Acid Voices. It's a sequence, and we're kind of messing around with some formants and making some weird kind of acid sound, and it sounds something like this. All right, so this one was a lot of fun to make. It's a lot of weird stuff to put together, but anyway, let's go ahead and recreate this from scratch. So I have a fresh copy of the Repro. Let's right-click and go to Init Preset. So the first thing that we should do, especially on our main one here, is let's turn off all of these effects here because a lot of the magic happens in the effects. Without the effects, it sounds something like this. So still a cool sound, but like I was saying before, the whole character of this sound really comes alive with our effects, and we're going to go through all of that. So first things first, let's take a look at our oscillators. So we're going to be using both of them here, as we can see in the mix, and some of this noise, but we're technically going to be using this as feedback. So for our first oscillator, we're going to be using the saw and the square. So make sure to turn our square up here, no pulse width change, and then the mix is going to be in 70% in the mixer. And for oscillator B, we're going to be dropping this down 1 octave. So let's drop this bad boy down. And we're just going to be using the square here. As you can see, the triangle and the saw are going to be both down. So let's bring these down and bring up our square. And we're going to be adjusting the pulse width to about 79 here. So let's take a listen to see how that changes it. And let's change some of the volume here. This is going to be 95% in the mix here. So let's bring this down just a little bit while we create this patch here. We're going to have to do a lot of interesting gain compensations here. So we have something kind of like this here for now. And what we can actually do, we are actually dropping the volume down in the mixer. So I'll just do that here on the main output. So we're down 34. Let's turn off our sequencer as well here. Okay. So we have something like this here. Okay, so basically we've dialed in our oscillators, right? So nothing too crazy going on here. Now we need to talk about the mixer because we're also putting this noise, but we're using this as feedback, and this is going to be 100% in the mix. So let's turn this knob all the way to the right and change from noise to feedback. Kind of gives it a really nasty, kind of aggressive square character. Okay, so next up, we got to work on our filter. So our cutoff's going to be 26. So let's bring this, yeah, it is 26. Okay, bring this down to 26. And our resonance 15. And then envelope amount is 73. And then we have our keyboard amount at 75, which is going to be default, so we don't have to change anything there. Next up, the filter envelope here. So our attack is going to be 0 and decay 57. So we have 0 and our decay is going to be 57. So let's bring that up just a little bit here. And then our sustain at 21. There we go. And then our release is going to be 64. Okay, so now we need to work on our amp envelope. So we're just going to be kind of, I guess, moving around through these windows. So amp is going to be 0 attack and 48 delay. So this attack is 0, and then decay is 48. And then our sustain is going to be 48 as well, and our release is 38. So 48, 38 here. So 48 for the sustain, and 38 for the release. Okay, so we're pretty close here. So something that we also have to keep in mind, so especially in the Repro 1 here, as well as the 5, there's the tweaks panel, and don't overlook this panel because there's a lot of cool, I don't know, maybe Easter eggs if you want to say that, I don't know, but there's a lot of cool stuff you can find under there. So let's go ahead and take a peek under the hood, literally, I suppose. Okay, so oscillator 1 is going to be P1, and oscillator 5 is going to be P5, and if we see here by default, we both have P1. So take a listen to... we get a different texture for this right here. And if you notice on our filter here, we have driven that we're using in our main patch, and by default we have crispy, so let's go to driven. And you can see these change the sound drastically. So it's really cool if you make a really interesting patch, kind of flip under the hood here and kind of move around the filters a little bit, maybe change some of the oscillators here, and you might find out that your patch might sound a little bit better or worse depending on what you're doing exactly. So yeah, there's just some interesting stuff under the hood to kind of look at. So we're pretty identical at this point. So now what we can do is we can go back to our synth and go to our effects, which is going to be kind of the whole meat and potatoes, I guess, of this sound, right? So without the effects, and then with everything enabled, we have that crazy stuff. So first one is going to be jaws. Let's go ahead and enable this jaws right here. And our folds, so we can see our data display here. So our folds are going to be 64 and teeth at 6. So 64 and teeth at 6. This has been one of my favorite wave folders. It's just nasty, man. And then this bias knob. This one is cool, especially for this kind of sound here. It almost gives it more of a hollowy sound to it. Okay, so next up we have Lyrebird, and let's go ahead and turn this on. Actually, we should do the sonic conditioner because that's next in the chain here, which makes a little bit more sense. So our gain is -8 and transient is 3.6. So, oh my goodness, I do that all the time here. Let's bring this up here again. Okay. So for our for our sonic conditioner, we said -8 to bring this down here. Turn this on actually. -3.6 for the transient. So we're still pretty exact here for both patches so far. And next up we have Lyrebird, so got to give it some nice space. So sync 1/16, and it's going to be on dark. So sync over 1/16, which is comes on default, and let's change from clean to dark. Now for some of these other settings that we have, our time is going to be 2, which is default, so we don't have to change that. We are going to move the mix to 23, so let's bring this down. And then our regen is going to be 25. And we got to turn it on. I do that all the time. It's like the whole joke thing, right? Where like you're compressing something and you're like, oh yeah, that sounds right. And you look in your compressors bypass, you're like, oh my God. We've all done that. Okay, so next we're gonna go on medium for the modulation. Okay, so we're pretty close. So, okay, if you've been relaxing for the most part of the video, kind of chilling out, doing your thing, this is the point where you want to get your pencil out and kind of take some notes. This is where the interesting spot of the whole video comes into play. So let's turn on our Res EQ. That's where that craziness comes. So basically what we're doing is using this as a resonator and kind of creating formants basically out of this, this module. So we're turning this on, and let's take a look at this guy. So we're turning this on. Let's kind of copy some of the settings we have. So the first thing we need to do is change this from EQ to resonator. Let's move this over just a little bit more. Okay, so we have it on the resonator, and for the low, we're not really doing anything, so we can kind of leave this at 2550, right? So 2550. You could use this later on if you want to, but I have not used this whatsoever, so we can skip these two knobs. Next up, the mid is going to be at 41. Let's bring this down to 41. And this amount is going to be 81. And the high is going to be 71. And then the amount's going to be 87. Now these values really, especially the mid and the high, where these are going to be placed at is really up to taste. Depending on what you're playing and the frequency range or really what it sounds like, that's going to be where you kind of dial in the formants and especially the modulation of that, which we're going to get to in just a second. So let's compare these. Drastically different. And that's because we need to change the Q here. So that's really the meat and potatoes of this. So this Q is going to be at 53, whereas this one right here is at 0. So 53, yes, 53, okay. So we're close there. It almost sounds like an electric guitar. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Even stop there and make an electric guitar, put some interesting distortion, cabinet or something like that, some reverb, you have some pretty cool patch there. Anyway, we're gonna be making voices. So why doesn't this sound like that? And that's because modulation. So let's go over here to the keys and move this back over. So what we're doing is we're modulating the mid frequency and the high frequency. So these two knobs are gonna be modulated by our filter envelope. So whatever shape this is doing, that's gonna be modulating these parameters by this depth that we set. So with that being said, let's go ahead and set that up. So as we saw here, we have the mid frequency and the high frequency. So we can right click this here, and then we go to our Res EQ, and we select our mid frequency, and then right click this guy, and then go to Res EQ and select the high frequency. Now these are mapped. Now we need to tell them we don't need key follow or velocity for these. So we select this and go to filter envelope on both of these. Now the amounts are going to be important, right? So this first one's going to be 47. So let's take a listen as we change that. That's almost giving us almost a little bit of that acid sound, right? Especially on the top end there, or the mid end there. And we get the high frequency, but we're going positive in this direction here. And what we're doing here on this one is we're actually going negative on the high frequency, which is kind of interesting. If you look at this on a graph, it's kind of just moving in opposite directions. You'll see it on the EQ, which is kind of cool to see. So the high frequency is negative 67. So let's listen to that here. And that's where this whole thing comes into play. Now, if we play this kind of legato, it's not going to re-trigger that. We could select here for re-trigger if we want to do that. But we're going to be using this as a sequencer anyway, so it kind of doesn't really matter, right? Okay, so we're pretty close. We have one more effect to go to, and that's going to be the drench, so our reverb. So let's go ahead and turn that on, and let's turn this on here in our effects chain, drench, and our settings. We can move this over a little bit more. Can we see? Okay, we can see both. Okay, so our pre-delay is going to be 42, so let's bring this up to 42. And then our decay is at 37. Our tone's all the way to the right at 91. Not all the way to the right, but pretty substantially to the right. And then dry wet's going to be 34. Okay, so that's essentially how the entire patch is made. Now, in the sequencer page is where we kind of make this alive. Now, you can use the same sequence if you want to, because this patch is going to be available for free anyway, so you can use it if you'd like to. You can always make your own as well. Really depends on what you're doing. So we're here on the sequencer page, and let's go to both of them. And what we're kind of doing here is this clock is going to be 1/16. So turn it to the right here, and then we can turn our sequencer to play. And we're using 16, so we can go here and click 16. And it's going to step through all of these here. So what I kind of generally like doing sometimes is just kind of having the pitch the same and kind of just turning some off, making some slides, kind of adjusting things so I can get like a rhythmic kind of thing first, and then slowly adjust the notes and then kind of just build it up from there. So for this one, we have dot dot slide, so dot dot slide, and then we have dot dot slide again, so dot dot slide again. And then dot dot, we have another slide on 9, and then we have 2 dots, and then another slide here, and then a dot, and then 2 slides. And that's going to be this main sequence here. Okay, so now we can go ahead and change the notes. So the first slide is going to be on 12, so this is kind of where it starts coming alive. The next slide is going to be 10, so we can bring this up to 10. I do love how this sliders feel so nice. There's some synths out there where they have this kind of workflow and you're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. It takes so long. So it's kind of nice how quick that is. Okay, so next one is going to be 7 here on step 9, and it's also that slide there. And then 10, 12 on this first slide, so we're going to bring this to 10, and then this next one here is going to be 12. Right over here. And the last one here, this line is going to be 8. We'll turn this guy on here, so. And there you have it. That's how you make acid voices. So feel free to mess around with the sequencer and also these formants here, or these, I guess, these resonators ranges here, the mid and the high, and you can really kind of move things around and find that really cool vocal kind of sound. And like I said before, I kind of want to show you what this looks like here when you see this on an EQ. It's actually kind of interesting. They're just kind of moving into each other, and that's because we're doing that positive depth here on the if you go back to the keys, this positive modulation and the negative modulation, and kind of just watching these two kind of crash into each other. And you put some drums behind it. And you remember, put some hi-hats and bass and make a whole track out of something like that. It's a lot of fun. So hopefully you learned something. Thank you so much for watching. And like I said before, if you want this patch for free, there's a link in the video description below, and you can just load it up and just go ahead and have fun. But yeah, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.